Aloha and welcome everyone to another live digital conversation here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. We're getting ready for the weekend here. Pretty excited about that, but wanted to make sure we jumped online to have our live digital conversation for the week. It's been a long and busy week, and we're pretty excited for the weekend, as I mentioned earlier. But always look forward to the opportunity to connect with everybody here online. Today, Mr. Aotearoa is tied up. Uh, our parents are visiting the land of the long white cloud, and so Mr. Aotearoa is probably playing host. And I did send him the link so that if he is able to break away and join us here on the live digital conversation, he can do so. But until then, we're gonna rock it here as a Lone Ranger here, Mr. Tuafala here from Southern Nevada, the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. We been having quite a few requests from a lot of the viewers and the listeners to have more of a discussion on the Chief of War. Obviously, Jason Momoa's efforts there, and with the show, I think they have 3 episodes out so far. And so there's a lot of interest and discussion on it. So we understand why a lot of people have been messaging and saying, hey, can we have more discussions on Chief of War? So that's really where we're focusing our discussion today. We have some items here. We had our digital producer, Mr. Grok, do some research for us, put together some general points that we're going to walk through on Kaiana. Kaiana is the primary character of the Chief of War and played by Jason Momoa himself. So he's kind of an interesting character in Hawaiian and Polynesian history. We'll walk through some key data over his life and talk through some of the experiences that he had. We also have some social media clips kind of pertaining to the Chief of War, some of the commentary there from some of the people involved in it, and also some historical discussions as well that we'll kind of walk through and react to some of those videos. And then we do have a probably close out the show this evening, or depending where you are this morning, on some interesting points or unknown facts about Kaiana that we will revisit and just kind of walk through real quick. So once again, if you're just joining us, welcome to the live digital conversation here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. As always, if you're joining us from YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, or X, make a comment if you want to interact. And also, especially for those on YouTube, if there's a specific question or comment you want to highlight, use the super chats. We do make a commitment that if we see a super chat pop up, we will make an effort to make sure that that super chat appears on the screen and that question or comment is highlighted and brought up during the live digital conversation. So with that being said, I am going to start off our discussions here and kick it off with some words specifically from Jason Momoa himself. So we're gonna pull it up here real quick. First, we're gonna talk about or show Jason Momoa and his discussion about storytelling and why that's important for Polynesians in general and also for Hawaii, and why he made this project a priority for him as well, and probably his children. That's probably a big driver for him there.
We picked the right cast, and the biggest beautiful thing that I have experienced is that, my inspirations come from Aotearoa, Cliff Curtis, Temueta Morrison, Once Were Warriors, Whale Rider. They're so like what the New Zealand Film Board does for their culture and how they tell these Maori stories is amazing. That's what we, as when we were young, got to look up to, and we hoped one day that Hawaii would do that. But Hawaii, they make stories here and then they leave and they use our resources, but they don't actually tell our stories to that level. So what's exciting is that through that inspiration and being able to shoot down there, all of the talent pool for Kanaka Maoli and the Hawaiians here isn't as big because normally we're put in as like a hospitality or a greeter or some luau or dancing and doing something in some movie that's, a comedy. And so there's never this, we're not playing our kings and our chiefs and all these things. And so there's a lack of, we don't have those resources teaching it. All those actors came here and then we made a system called ICANN, and they're teaching our next generation. So while we were doing this, not only did we unite Polynesia, we asked our ancestors, we asked our cousins, our neighbors, and all of us united together to tell the unification of the Hawaiian Islands. Polynesia united, they all should feel proud. So when you see this in Tahiti, you see this in Fiji, Vanuatu, like you see that is us. We picked the right cast.
I think that's really important what Jason is saying there, because I don't know if you guys remember, there was a little bit of drama. I guess certain people were not happy with Jason's decisions to have a lot of our Maori brothers and sisters play a lot of these roles. But as he mentioned here, it was out of practicality that he, took that route. And he's saying the talent pool from Aotearoa was much larger. And also that was his inspiration in getting into acting, was leveraging the example that was set by our brothers and sisters there in Aotearoa to help him drive his career, and really agree with him 100%. This is a win for all of Polynesia and Pacific Islanders in general. So really trying to point at issues such as, should have been only Hawaiians, that is a very narrow perspective, not a long-term perspective, and not very practical either. And so this is something that we really need to embrace, in my opinion. Looking at Jason Momoa here, is we really need to accept the fact that a win for one of our Polynesian islands is a win for all of us. And this is also something we promote here on the Polynesianized podcast, especially this perception of, here's Tonga, here's Samoa, here's Tuvalu, here's Tokelau, these separate islands, and that somehow Tonga's claim, or only Tongans have claim to the surviving of colonization. That's a win for all Polynesians in general. Real quick here, T-Style, he says, malo ke puke puke for nua malo T-Style. Appreciate it. Appreciate the interaction there. So thank you for stopping by. Malo. All right. Once again, quick reminder to anyone, if you want to participate, please throw it in the chat. And if you want to throw in a kava bag as well in the super chats, feel free to do so. And we'll answer any questions or comments that come through there. But I think that's a really important point that Jason Momoa is kind of expressing there. Sometimes Polynesians we are our worst enemy. And so we sit here and, pull each other down. We don't support each other and don't realize the bigger picture is a win for one of us is a win for all of us. So really appreciate Jason Momoa's perspective there. He shares some good insight and some great thoughts. Hey, Moleni Sima says, Malo Mau Tegelangi. Malo Moleni, appreciate you stopping by. Malo. Tuning in from Facebook. So as we're going to go here, here's another video we want to look at. And obviously we know that Kamehameha is played by a Hawaiian, which I think is a smart move. Though, as Jason expressed earlier, there's, his inspirations were drawn from the Maori actors and actresses that really paved the way for him to see a vision for him in acting and opportunities for him. However, he did cast a Hawaiian for the character of Kamehameha. And this is kind of the background or the story that he shares behind the casting of that role. And I think it's really interesting because this is something that could have been a risk, because he did not pick someone that was quote unquote an actor. This gentleman is he's a taro farmer. They ran into each other. They were paddling and working together on canoes, and this is the story behind how that role was cast, and it's kind of interesting. And we'll listen into what Jason Momoa saw in that opportunity.
I see him on the beach in Kauai, and I'm like, who is that? And it was just like, boom. I knew instantly. Took a picture next to him. He thought it was crazy.
That's how Kainamakua, a taro farmer, was cast as Kamehameha the Great, the first ruler of Hawaii's United Kingdom.
I constantly had to keep trying to convince him to play it. What a scary thing. You've never acted before, and you're going to play the King of Kings. And he killed it.
How crazy is that? A lot of times we think these great ideas come about from all this planning, strategy, and all this deep thinking. But many times some of the greatest things come about from a gut feeling, gut inspiration. And that's what Jason here is saying he utilized in casting the role of Kamehameha, right? He just sees this guy on the beach and he's like, something tells me this is the right guy for the role. And the guy is not even an actor, never acted in his life. And to make things even worse, he's got to work hard to convince this person that he's the right person to portray Kamehameha the Great. So I think that's something that's kind of interesting. It shows us a lot about the character of Jason Momoa here. He is very, very creative, very open-minded, and he's not afraid to take some risks, and he has some recruiting capabilities, right? Like this individual, obviously, and I saw another interview of Kaina Makua saying, he thought Jason Momoa wasn't serious and that, he'd probably never hear about it again. But a few years later, after their conversations, Jason Momoa comes back and say, hey, remember that conversation we talked about? Remember those times I've been trying to convince you should play this role? The time's now. Let's do it. So really is interesting. So Jason Momoa is showing a lot of creativity, leadership. He's showing some recruiting capabilities, and it just shows, just because you're Jason Momoa, just because you're famous, just because you may have some resources, doesn't mean it's easy to get this done. Doesn't mean that bringing the chief of war to life is an easy thing. And even then, this and all that hard work and all that effort, and one of the first things we hear out from our own people is, well, he messed up. He didn't cast enough Hawaiians on it, and this is a story that should be told by Hawaiians only, and blah, blah, blah. Come on, guys. When I hear that from people, I can't help but say, maybe these are people who've never really done anything, because you don't realize how difficult it is to accomplish something like this, right? Because even with the brand recognition that Jason Momoa, which he worked very hard to get, it was extremely challenging for him. And it's not just to put on the show, but to do it in the way that he feels stays true to his people, his history, and the vision that he has and the team that he's working for. T-Style here says, I wonder if we will see a glimpse into the Tuitonga of those times. I mean, that's what's really interesting about this, T-Style, is 100%, right? We should see and also envision there are going to be some commonalities, obviously slightly different, but there's going to be some commonalities in there, right? I mean, we see certain practices there that were applicable to the Tuitonga times. We see that the practice of polygamy was very common, and that's what we see. We see Ka'ahumanu, who marries to Kamehameha. She flat out says, I'm going to be one of many, right? Like that was just the general practice back then. And so it was true of the Tuitonga as well. That's why it's kind of interesting to hear certain people say that the Tuitonga was only marrying to certain islands, hint, hint, because that island was the island that gave royal blood to the Tuitonga, and that's why they did it. I was like, really? The Tuitonga was marrying to Tongans, to Samoans, to Tahitians, to Uveans and Futuans, and to Tokelauans. He had multiple spouses from all those areas. And many times the Tuitonga was from a mother that was within Tonga, many times, and mother from Uvea or Futuna or the Tokelau or Tahiti. So we will see parallels in the story here by the chief of war that'll have a lot of similarities and insight. One of the things that I thought was very interesting, and we've discussed this a handful of times, is that the Hawaiian Islands were not unified, and it's not clear to me that they have a long-standing history of unification, right? Like Kamehameha comes through a prophecy, and it sounds like this prophecy, I don't know how accurate it is, but it, just based off of what we're seeing, that Kamehameha unifying the Hawaiian Islands was a monumental effort. It appears to be something that was never done. And this fits into a lot of our discussions in the past with many of our guests, and also many of the studies that we looked at, and just oral history. Diversification or decentralization of power throughout Polynesia seemed to be very common, right? And we see that in Hawaii. These were all the same family. They were all intermarrying with each other. And we'll see that when we go through Kaiana's history here later on in the show, but they were all related, right? The quote unquote kingdom of Maui, of Hawaii, of Hawaii, and Oahu, these were all related. And yet they were not unified power. They were not under a system of centralized power. It was decentralized power, which is what we see in the Tongan/Polynesian Empire, that was a common theme throughout the empire, except for one place, which was on Tongatapu, where power was centralized onto the Tuitonga, until the Tuitonga somewhat decentralized it a little bit through the Tu'ihatakalaua and the Tu'ikanukupolu. However, the Tuitonga still ruled supreme. So it was a delegation of power, but not necessarily a decentralization, but eventually it decayed and it devolved into that, especially during the civil wars in Tonga. So that's kind of the thoughts there, T-Style. Appreciate the comment. Once again, appreciate everybody joining. If you're joining us here for the first time, welcome to the live digital kava session here on the Polynesianized podcast. Once again, if you want to contribute, you want to help to the show, throw in a super chat. And if you want to make sure a comment or a question is brought up, super chat is also a way to do that. So, and also if you don't join us live, but you're going to be watching this post the live, if you want to throw in a super thanks as well, we will recognize that on our next live digital kava session and bring out any comments or questions there. So really interesting there. Really appreciate a lot of the leadership and the vision that Jason Momoa here is showing. And, kudos to him. This is not easy. This is difficult, and glad that he was able to bring that to the forefront. Here's another video quick, and I think this is one of the co-writers, co-creators with Jason Momoa on this as well. He brings that up or brings up some interesting things. And I also saw something that I wanted to highlight after he talks about the feathered cape that he describes here. But let's listen into that real quick.
Okay, this is an ahu'ula, this feather cape, but this feather cape is actually hand woven by Rick San Nicholas, ahu'ula master practitioner. He was our cultural advisor for capes, and this is his. This is real. This is not a prop. Something like this, to be completely honest, was reserved for royalty. I can say that I am a direct descendant of the Kahikili line, that Maui line. In the show you'll see King Kahikili, and I am an extension of him, and so wearing it, I've never had the opportunity to wear a real one, and so it means a lot. It's wonderful. Okay, this is an ahu.
That's pretty cool, right? That on a global stage, they're able to wear these ahu'ulas and share the culture, because this is something that is really sweeping the globe right now. Hopefully they have tremendous success. And so that's pretty cool. Also cool that he's a descendant of Kahikili. So, that probably has greater meaning to him. One of the things that was kind of interesting to me was and this is something I never knew existed amongst the Hawaiians, but they're wearing ta'ovalas. I don't know what it's called in Hawaiian, but I noticed in the series they're all wearing that waist mat. And let me see, that is something that's typical of Tonga. That's something that's that I always thought was unique to Tonga, but obviously Uvea and Futuna, they have a version of that. I've also seen, obviously in Fiji, but that's because of the Tongan influence. Easily explanation there. But I did think it was interesting that I saw a lot of the characters, and even this gentleman, wearing a ta'avala or a waist mat. Don't know a lot of history behind that. Maybe we'll ask Grok in the background. What kind of examples he can share of waist mats in Hawaii as traditional attire. So I thought that was interesting. That was something that kind of caught me by surprise. And obviously being heavily influenced and understanding that that's a marquee item for Tongans, that did stick up to me. And so that was something that was kind of unusual when I watched the show and the video here. Our research assistant's going to see what he can find in regards to waist mats in Hawaii, because on all the art and representations of that, I thought that was interesting. So if anyone has any information on that share of what they looked at, so interesting. Speaking about some of the interesting things, obviously there's the opening scene. If you haven't watched Chief of War, the opening scene is Kaiana or Jason Momoa's character, then they're hunting for a shark, right? And they use kava and other items in there, and I found it very interesting. Obviously, there's Tongan practices of no'oanga that are very, very interesting in that area. So I thought, that was kind of interesting to see that parallel. Once again, as some of the viewers have mentioned, we will see parallels. Absolutely. We see all kinds of parallels of the Polynesian islands throughout that sharing history and culture. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of walk through that. Let's see what Grok's come out with first here. Speaking about the waist mats here. Let's see here. So it says here, in traditional Hawaiian culture, finely woven mats made from materials like makaloa were prized for their softness and intricate patterns. These mats, often produced on the island of Niihau, were sometimes fashioned into garments rather than solely used for floor coverings or sleeping mats. You know, in Tonga, you have the papa or a fala. While not exclusively limited to waistwear, as Hawaiian waist attire like the malo or men or pa'u skirt for women was more commonly made from kapa or tapa cloth for natural fibers like tea leaves. Historical accounts describe makaloa mats being adapted into wearable items that could be wrapped around the body, including potentially at the waist as wraps or skirts for ceremonial or daily use. Below are some key examples based on documented Hawaiian ethnological sources. Interesting. So it looks like ta'awala or mats was a pretty common practice there. Ahu pavahe. This is a garment crafted from soft pattern makaloa mats featuring geometric designs. Pavahe, plated in red brown colors. It was typically made using long makaloa stems and worn as a striped or decorative wrap. The mat's flexibility allowed to be donned like clothing, often tied or draped around the body for protection or status display. Kihei, made from makaloa matting, a rectangular cloak or shawl woven from makaloa traditionally worn over one shoulder and tied in a knot. So kind of like the feathered cloaks. Interesting. While primarily a shoulder garment, its rectangular shape and soft texture made it versatile for wrapping around the torso or hips as a protective layer, especially among higher status individuals. It served both practical and ceremonial purposes, such as during rituals or everyday attire. Okay. Moena pavahe as adaptive attire. These finely plated mats were luxury items exchanged as tributes or gifts among ali'i. That's kind of what Tongans use them to quite a bit, and could be used in clothing context. For instance, a notable 1874 example involved a makaloa mat with a woven petition presented to King Kalakaua, highlighting their cultural significance. Though primarily bed mats, their fineness allowed for garment adaptations, including body wraps that might encircle the waist, similar to other Polynesian mat attire. Very interesting. These examples reflect pre-contact and early post-contact Hawaiian practices where mat weaving was a skilled woman's craft. In modern context, similar woven items like lauhala bands or mats are sometimes used in hula or Polynesian dance costumes for hip banding, drawing from broader Pacific traditions, though they are not strictly traditional Hawaiian waist attire. For comparison, neighboring Polynesian cultures like Tonga prominently feature waist mats, ta'avala, as formal wear, which may influence contemporary Hawaii interpretations. Interesting. It's kind of interesting to kind of see that. That was kind of a surprise for me. So it looks like there is some interesting history behind it, and it was primarily, waist mats or coverings for the chiefly lines. So kind of interesting there. All right. Let's see if there's anything here on the other side, if there were any other videos that were kind of interesting. There was one that kind of describes one of the attire or one of the things that they wore, and it was those necklaces, right? That you see a lot of the major chiefs wearing. And so that was something that was interesting. And then, yes, seeing here in the chats the no'oanga. And so that's something we'll kind of revisit. We'll kind of show the no'oanga. So viewers who see and watch Chief of War and see the actions there and see the comparison to the no'oanga, that's something we'll kind of walk through real quick as well. So let's watch this.
Jason Momoa's latest saga is on Apple TV streaming right now, Chief of War. I've seen the first 2 episodes, and I saw the actors wearing this, which they should have been, which is a lei niho palaoa. And what is this? Well, this is made out of a sperm whale's tooth. Now, this is not old. This is a reproduction, and as are the ones that they have on it. But the original ones would have had this piece of ivory, sperm whale, and hair, human hair. The hair would represent the lineage of those individuals. Very important, great mana. And it could be as long as 1,700 feet, as well as thousands of strands of hair. So a huge commitment to make the braids itself. Now, the pendant itself, the palaoa, which is made out of the whale's tooth, is interesting because it has mana. It has the spirit of the gods. And it would have been, this mana would have been not only used for ceremonials, but for war. And the only thing more ceremonial and powerful would be the feathered cape, which you'll see, and the headdresses, which you'll also see. So when you see this object, they're trying to represent the sensibilities of the li'i, the individuals that are in charge wearing this, both men and women. By having those on in that show, to me, it brings it to life. It's a lei niho palaoa.
Interesting. So that was kind of interesting. The part that stuck out to me was used to be relatively common when I grew up in Tonga for kafas to be made out of hair, right? Where you would have your kafa that you tied your waist mat with, would have hair, whether it was hair that, the individual, when they were young, they would grow out their hair, wouldn't cut it when they were babies, wouldn't be until they were much older, they would have long hair. They would then cut that hair and make it into a kafa, or hair of one of their ancestors or parents. They would have that hair, their mom have their hair to use that as a kafa. So thought that was interesting. I see that parallel of the use of human hair in relation to attire or ornaments that would be worn by individuals. That was definitely something that shared between all Polynesian islands, and would be a remnant of that. Let's see here. We're gonna dive next into
Preparation
the
included
story of the No'oanga, just to kind of show additional parallels that are shown in God of War. Yeah, I love God of War. That's a great game. But in Chief of War, in regards to, let's make that a little bit bigger. Let's go with this one. Okay. The No'oanga and that story, so that, if you haven't seen it or you want to go back and look at the Chief of War shark incident or opening scene versus what's done, and it's primarily out of Navutoka, where this practice is heavily or originated from a lot of oral history. Let's kind of see that real quick.
Preparation included important items: a rope for the lasso, or maya, food for the fishermen, or manava, chunks of pork for the bait, or maunu, and a device called whangongo to shake in the water to attract the sharks. Each canoe was prepared with care, without argument or contention of any kind. The fishermen are called Sinilau, after the famous lover of the shark goddess, Hina. The sharks are referred to as Hina.
Hinae, manu anu mai, e kua lulu e whangongo, o kaha tuinga papai. Ofo, pēmiri mai. Ofo, watahaia mai. Oi kātua lai whai. Hinae, o tauma whākua I vai.
As Hina appears, the Sinilau must not show fear. Otherwise, the spell will be broken and the sharks will not approach.
Ofo, pēmiri mai.
If the sharks keep their distance, the captain orders one of the Sinilau to leap into the ocean with gifts of
Yeah, who wants to be the Sinilau in that situation, right? How interesting is that? You go out there, you shake the fangongo, the shark comes, it's a little shy, it's not coming close. And the captain turns to you and say, you be the Sinilau. Jump in with the pork leg here, swim around and make Hina feel comfortable to come closer. So yeah, I'm glad I'm not the one who's Sinilau, nor do I claim to be a Sinilau, even though Sinilau is a famous person in a lot of the oral histories throughout Polynesia. But heavy pass for me on wanting to participate as a Sinilau there.
food for Hina and lead her back to the canoe. When the captain sees the sharks following Sinilau, he shouts, Marie, Marie, bravo, excellent.
Maria, you're not dead
Ina
yet.
e, ko kapanolo to kua iai. Ko ho rari ko i whatan. Ko ho tau mawha ko i vai. Mea mai o whia maari ai. Mea mai o tōwha ai.
The captain then shouts, Viri, Viri, bear hoko, turn and come into the noose. Going for the bait, the shark swims into the noose, lowered in the water by the Sinilau. Because it is forbidden to shed the blood of the shark, the fishermen kill it with a mallet. With each blow, the Sinilau shout, Deao, 100. The shark is then heaved into the boat. With their precious catch, the captain orders the Sinilau to return home. As they approach the shore, conch shells are blown to inform the villagers the fishing has been successful. The entire village celebrates the voyage and distributes the catch. The largest portion will be taken to the royal compound. The rest will be distributed to the families of the village.
Very interesting. One of the things that for some reason, I have it stuck in my head of first being taught this practice in Tonga, that the first shark that comes doesn't get killed. That they actually you put on a necklace on that first one because that is Hina, and then you let that one go, and then it's the next shark that actually gets brought in. That's what I kind of recollect. Maybe I'm getting a little too old there. That is something that what I remember. But what an interesting and intriguing tradition. Like how do you first start that? Who goes out there and starts this tradition, right? Who go out there and says this is how we're going to get the shark? That, I mean, to me, there has to be more behind this story, and there has to be, I know the story of Hina and Sinilau, and that's the driver, but there's got to be something more going on there. I don't know why or what that would be, but the tools that are used, the fangongo, the noose, the kava being brought, and and also the striking of the sharks, making sure you don't spill the blood. Like, is that just, where did that knowledge come from? How do you obtain that knowledge? And maybe the story behind it is not really explaining the how that knowledge was obtained, but that was how the knowledge could be remembered. The easiest was to put the story and incorporate the steps of executing this ritual by putting it into story form. I don't know. I do just find it very, very intriguing, because how do you come up with that? Like, you don't just sit around and say, hey guys, let's go out there, let's shake some coconut shells in the water, That'll attract the sharks. And by the way, if they're a little shy, let's swim in and swim around with some pork and make the shark feel comfortable, right? Oh, and by the way, when you're capturing it, this thing that can kill you or severely injure you, we got to make sure we don't spill the blood, right? Oh, and every time you strike it, say 100, 100. It's just crazy. There's got to be more to it. And it's fascinating. And I think, how cool is it that this is something that is found through? Apparently, they must have been leveraging some knowledge from Hawaii. There must have been a similar practice in Hawaii. Could have been a slightly different story. Could have been a slightly different strategy and approach to remembering how and why to do the certain thing. But I find that quite intriguing, to say the least. And so, really interesting to see that, and to see what kind of thinking and strategy went into building that, and then to see it in Jason Momoa's opening scene for the Chief of War. I almost said God of War again. So let me see. That may be the last video that I had there, to kind of walk through some of that initial stuff to talk about the God of War, kind of prep us, get into some interesting things. Now we're going to dive into Kaiana. And Kaiana is that main character. I thought it would be cool, just to kind of bring some more direct history, some more knowledge and context to that character. So our research assistant, Grok, to help us get some data and some information going, and kind of put together a little bit of a presentation. Ta-da! So here are a couple interesting sketches of Kaiana. So, I mean, the guy has a lot of reference to him. Obviously looks to, wear his hat, his ahu'ula, and his spear. That was always constants with him. Before we read into some of the text here, notice on the black and white one, and I noticed this in a couple other areas, where they don't call him Kaiana, they call him Kaiana with a T. And if you watch and listen to Kawa University, and that series he puts on for William Mariner, he talks about how when Mariner is in Hawaii, that, like, for example, we see here Kamehameha, King Kamehameha. It's recorded in Mariner's time as Ta-meha-meha, right? Like, which makes sense, because the I guess the interpretation, somebody can correct me if wrong, of Kamehameha is the lonely one. But when you see Ta-meha-meha, it's closer to Tama, right? Closer to much more of a Tongan type of perspective on that. So very interesting there, that Kaiana's name, maybe traditionally speaking, may have been a Ta'yana, meaning it was more of a T, right? And there's Kawa University talks about a lot of those things, like Kona is actually Tonga. Very interesting, keep that in mind. But I thought that was interesting when I saw some of the art on Kaiana, that they are actually spelling his name with a T. So that's something that kind of stuck out to me. So with that being said, let's dive into Kaiana and kind of see what this character is about. Maybe useful to everybody when you're going through the series and watching it, and just, maybe out of pure interest for history as well. So Kaiana Hula, a towering figure in Hawaiian history who's often overshadowed by his contemporary King Kamehameha I. Known as a warrior chief, explorer, and complex political player, Kaiana is the central character in the recent series Chief of War. We'll break down his genealogy, early life, physique, groundbreaking travels abroad, and lasting influence on Hawaii's unification era. Mahalo, Grok, for putting in a narrative. Drawing from firsthand explorer accounts, he published works like those by Hawaiian historians Samuel Kamakau and Abraham Fornander. So we're not going to put the references here, but obviously what Grok's telling us here, he is putting in a lot of the comments and descriptions from these recognized historians and published work. That's where a lot of the text here is coming from. So this is the only area we do have some pictures, so enjoy it. The rest of the presentation here is just going to be text, and we'll walk through it. Born around 1755, Kaiana hailed from a prestigious Ali'i noble line that arguably rivaled Kamehameha's in rank. His father, Ahu'ula Akeave, or simply Ahu'ula, was a younger son of King Keave Kekahi Ali'i Moku of Hawaii Island, tying him directly to the ancient house of Keave mentioned in the Kumu Lipo chant. You know what? I don't even know what the Kumu Lipo chant is. Let's see what that's all about. Kumu Lipo chant. What is that? Come on, Grok. Let's do some work. Figure out what that Kumu Lipo chant is so we can know what we're talking about, because I have no idea what that is. All right. His mother, Kaupekamoku, brought even more royal blood. She was a granddaughter of Ahia from the powerful E family of Hilo on her father's side, and a half-sister to King Kekaulike of Maui on her mother's, linking Kaiana to Maui's ruling house. So once again, these ruling families in Hawaii are all interrelated. They're presented as individual islands and kingdoms, but the truth is a lot of these people are intermarrying and are related to each other, yet it wasn't a centralized power system. This system was decentralized, divvying up power and authority, and we've revisited this over and over, and it pops up throughout Polynesia that when you start to see that pattern being established all over the place, then you can start to say, this was by design, right? Like, this is not by chance. And that's why Kamehameha uniting all the Hawaiian Islands was an extremely rare occasion, and maybe the first time since the Tu'itonga and Tangaloa that these areas were united. I'm just throwing that out there, which is funny. We'll save that. There's a video or a content creator who made a comment. We were tagged on it saying people shouldn't be talking about Hawaii's history with, chief of war coming out about Tonga. Tongans just need to be quiet. Well, true. Maybe if you believe that, then you should be quiet yourself, right? I mean, that's just my personal opinion there. It's like, if you really believe nobody should be commenting on it unless you're Hawaiian, then you shouldn't be commenting on anything either, and just saying, okay, it is what it is. Let the people comment. I disagree. I'm not going to comment because I don't believe. Whatever. Anyways, coming back to Kumu Lipo, I didn't know what that is, so we're just going to bring up the Kumu Lipo. It says the Kumu Lipo is an ancient Hawaiian chant, also known as a cosmogonic or genealogical mele in Hawaiian oral tradition. It serves as a foundational narrative in Hawaiian religion and culture, detailing the origins of the universe, the emergence of life forms from darkness, and the progression from natural and human elements through a series of evolutionary stages. The chant is structured as a mele kohu honua genealogical chant linking the Hawaiian Ali'i ruling chiefs directly to divine ancestors and the natural world, emphasizing themes of interconnectedness between humans, nature, and the cosmos. Okay, so the Kumulipo is a chant, genealogical, so it goes through all the genealogy, it looks like. Interesting. Let's see here. This made him the first cousin to key figures like King Kalaniʻopuʻu, Keʻoua, Kupuapaʻi Kalaninui, Kamehameha's father, Keawe Mauhiri of Hilo, King Kahekili II of Maui, and others, including Namahana, mother of Queen Kahamanu. See, these guys, everybody's related here. Jeez. And Kekua Manoha, father of the chief Kalanimoku. So these families are very intertwined throughout Hawaii, and all these families are ruling together, separating, they're interrelated, which makes things very fascinating to tell stories, and it can also lead to a lot more chaos. And maybe it was by design to try and limit the consolidation of power, as we mentioned many times. All right, let's go to the next slide. It says Kaiana had two younger half brothers, Namakeha and Nahiolea, both acclaimed warriors and sons of Kaupekamoku by Maui royal chiefs. So I think that's the mother, Kaupekamoku. So same mom, different fathers. Nahiolea is noted in some traditions as a po'olua, shared paternity father of Kekunaoa. Later genealogies, like one published in the Hawaiian newspaper Ka Nupepa Kuokoa on August 30th, 1901, mentioned Kaiana having a son named Kaelelele by a wife Haloa, whose descendants included daughters of Queen Liliuokalani's household around 1902. It is unclear if Kaiana was born on Kauai or Hawaii Island, but he was raised on Kauai, and that's where the chief of war starts. Kauai is where Kaiana leaves to, or goes to, when he leaves Kahekili's army. So he's basically going home, to where he was raised, with his siblings receiving elite training in engineering, architecture, genealogies, weather, prediction, and omen reading, skills that marked him as a learned ali'i from youth. So very educated in the traditional ways of Hawaiian culture, science, religion. That's part of being from the ali'i or the Eiki families. That's the kind of knowledge and information you get access to that, families that weren't in that noble lines wouldn't have access to. So pretty privileged um, upbringing for Kaiana. Little else survives about his childhood, but his noble upbringing positioned him amid the island kingdom's constant warfare, where he honed his warrior prowess early on. So very interesting. Everybody's related, but everybody's killing each other. And that is definitely what Chief of War is portrayed, right? That there is chaos amongst the chiefs, amongst the islands, and there is a lingering prophecy in the background that there is one that will arise to unite everyone. And that is a pretty big deal, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of chatter of, reunite us like we used to be many eons ago. It appears to come across as be united for the first time. And that's why there's a great prophecy. Something that I also thought was interesting, and I don't know if you guys recognize it if you've watched, they have like a prophetess, or kind of like an oracle kind of being that appears, and the name of this character is Taula, right? Which is exactly what we say one of the founding fathers and roles of the Tongan Empire is the taula, right? And so that is, I thought, was another parallel. Talking about parallels of the tuitonga and what we'll see here. The taula is word for word the same thing for the same role in the what looks like to be in the chief of war, as well over here. So something very interesting as you watch that's definitely a parallel, because taula, or the loau, is the high priest and also the civilization keeper, the mound building and all of that structure and organization for the Polynesian Empire, the Tongan Empire. So I thought that was an interesting parallel there. All right. Next, Malo Grok for putting this together for us. We got to recognize our digital producer. Next, physically, Kaiana was a giant among men, described in vivid first-hand accounts by European explorers who encountered him. British fur trader Captain John Meares, who hosted him on voyages in 1787 through 1788, wrote in his 1790 published journal that Kaiana was near 6 feet 5 inches in stature, and the muscular form of his limbs was of an Herculean appearance, with a carriage replete with dignity. What does that mean? Carriage. Is that's just, what's that saying? Is that like his shoulders? When you say someone's carriage? Interesting. Carriage replete with dignity befitting his high rank. Now, I did read in some other areas that 6'2". This one obviously says 6'5", and I thought I had asked Grok what was the average height of a European back then. Let me see here. All right, here we go. So let's say he's somewhere between 6'2", would still be a large human being, even in our day. I'm 6'2", and so if you're taller than 6'2", you're a big bloke. But let's look at why he was viewed as Herculean. And we're gonna come back here to Grok. Glad he did that. Glad I asked that question in the background. To kind of give us the average height of men. All right, so Europe average in the 1870s was 5'6". Right, so if the average male, did I say male? Maybe I just did human here, but 5'6" was the average, increasing by 4 inches over the next century to 5'10". 5'10", so it must be males, because 5'10" is pretty dang tall for a girl, even by today's standards. Because I thought the question was for males. Let's double check. Give me the heights in feet and inches. And did I ask for male? Yep, males. So we're looking at males. So I did ask for average height of males. So once again, 5'6", increasing by 4 inches over the next century, 5'10", by 1980. So even in modern day standards, he's huge, right? 6'5". In France, they're in the 1800s, they're 5'5". Dude. And they said that Napoleon was short for his time. And if the average height's 5'5", man, geez, Napoleon must have been like 3 foot at the rate we're going. They don't have any. The Netherlands is 5'5", 5'6". So yeah, I mean, the guy was the giant. Was a giant. If the average height is 5'6". So I thought interesting. So or 6'5", 6'5" with a carriage. Mears engraver captured this in full-page illustration showing Ka'ayana in his feathered cloak, ahu'ula, and helmet, mahiole, gripping a spear, an image echoed by Captain Nathaniel Porlock's 1789 account, which depicted him as handsome, muscular, and about 6'2". Oh yeah, that's the other one. It says about 6'2". So this guy is the guy's a monster compared. I mean, in the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, where the average male in Europe is 5'5", 5'6", and you got 6'5" or even 6'2" walking around, built like they said, a Hercules. I mean, that is impressive. That is impressive. Looks like the Hawaiians had good genetic makeup. During his travels in China, clad in his traditional attire and carrying a spear, Ka'ayana's imposing figure reportedly terrified the locals. Absolutely. So I wonder if the Europeans were 5'6" in the 1800s, and the Chinese are going to be smaller, or at least from what we see today, they would have been terrified to see this guy walking around. The guy would have been a monster. And and then this guy's walking around with a spear. He's wearing a helmet, has a cape on. If they knew who Superman was, they probably would have thought Ka'ayana was Superman, walking around with a cape and a helmet there, spearing people to death at his will. Interesting. Ka'ayana's imposing figure reportedly terrified locals in Macau and Whampoa, drawing crowds and even inspiring a portrait by the Japanese artist Spolium, later lithographed and preserved in historical records. Hawaiian historian Samuel Kamakau, in his 19th century works like Ruling Chiefs of Hawaii and Abram Fornander's An Account of the Polynesian Race, Polynesian race, nation. Some people wouldn't be happy with that. I thought that would be something that we were relatively unified on. But the more we do these podcasts and we do these live digital kava sessions, I'm pleasantly surprised how fractured we are as a people. Some people saying Eastern Polynesia is their own thing. Some people saying, Western Polynesia was their own thing. We weren't a united nation or a unified nation. And here we are having people looking from the outside in, calling us a nation like Captain Cook and a race of people. Interesting. Further emphasizes his striking presence, though they sometimes confuse him with the cousin of the same name. This still happens in Tonga to today, right? Confusing cousins with each other, and actually not trying to complain, but I used to suffer from this problem because playing rugby in Tonga, coming up through the high schools, the guys would have similar names with their cousins who were younger and would use their birth certificates to play on much younger teams, even though they were much larger. So that's still, maybe they're doing a better job now in Tonga. But growing up there, that was frustrating, right? You go into the rugby field. Here I am, 15 years old. You jog onto the field. Some guy has the same name as his cousin, uses his cousin's birth certificate. He looks like he's 30, and he's claiming he's 19 years old. And you got to go out there and fend for yourself out on the field. So that's funny. That's funny. Here's an interesting comment, Mo. I appreciate this. Mo says, remember Kamehameha warriors were called the Koa warriors, but if you change the K to a T, it's the Toa warriors. What you think? Tree name or after what we called the tough warriors back then, Kautoa? Fair point. fair point. I think that's reasonable. You know that that may be. I mean, even in Haamoa, they say the toa Samoa kautoa. Same thing in Tonga. So definitely some overlap on that for sure. Um, let's see here. Next on our slide, Kaiana's travels abroad set him apart as the first Hawaiian chief to venture beyond the islands, embarking on a transformative journey from 1787 to 1788 that exposed him to global cultures and technologies. On August 27, 1787, he sailed from Kauai aboard Mears ship Nootka, bound for Canton, Guangzhou, China, with a cargo of furs. Arriving in October, he spent 3 months in Macau and Whampoa, where he was outfitted in European clothes, attended Catholic Mass, learned English and Cantonese, and interacted with diverse foreigners. Dude, this guy was the modern day passport, bro, going everywhere, doing everything, living the YouTube life on that. So that's pretty crazy. I mean, so we're saying, this guy was speaking Chinese, Cantonese, learning it and really getting involved in it on the 1700s, 1800s. Pretty cool. Really cool story. This is a really cool character. Saying true to our word, Shogun, Malo and Maukava. Appreciate it. Malo and Maukava. So with that being said, I see your comment here. He says, Tua, rugby league refuses to accept its history and how it originates from rugby. That same mindset is parallel to how many Polynesian countries deny their origin from Tonga. That's what we run into a lot, Shogun. We get accused of overstepping our bounds and being prideful and not respecting, being disrespectful. All we're doing is asking questions, right? We're just asking questions and we're just saying we're coming to those conclusions, like you're saying, Shogun. It's like we look at what's in front of us and we look at patterns and we say, kind of feels like everything's pointing in this direction to Tonga. And just for stating those things, we are accused of being rude, being disrespectful. Where once again, we're just asking the questions. If there is another option that is a higher option, more logical option that doesn't point to Tonga, we're open to it. But so far, we haven't seen that. So whether they refuse to do it out of ignorance or just denial, I don't know, Shogun. But I right now, that's my position. It's hard to overcome that. But once again, Malo Shogun and Maukava, appreciate it. Malo. Let's see. So my man is learning English and Cantonese and going all around the world. My question is this is one thing as we're reading this that pops up in my mind is what drove Kaiana to leave? Is it really just his intrigue of wanting to experience what was out there in the world? He sees these people and says, man, where did these guys come from? I'm just driven by curiosity. Was it driven? Did his family say, hey, go learn about these people, figure out who they are? Is that why he went out? I'm just kind of interested because there doesn't seem to be, I think Lute shared with us that there were some Tongans that went overseas, went to Australia. They came back and said, yeah, there's some really smart people here and so forth. But what drives him to leave. And I know in the series, Moe, they show it that he's going to get killed. Is that why he left? Maybe that's a reasonable reason, right? Like, homeboy was under threat, and he's like, man, I'm just going to go press the reset button, go overseas, and then he learns all this stuff, and now he feels empowered to come back and really reimpose himself. But I thought that was interesting to say, man, why is a prominent chief wanting to leave? I just didn't know more if the perspective that's shared on the show is that accurate, historically accurate, or is that creative creative efforts just to kind of push a narrative in the story to keep it interesting, right? Creative liberty, I think that's what they call it. So very interesting. All right. So next slide. Transferring to Captain William Douglas, Ifenia, he visited Zamboanga in the Philippines for repairs, then sailed to the Aleutian Islands, Alaska. I mean, homeboy is going all over the place. I don't even like to go to Alaska. And, I know what snow is like, and I wouldn't like to go to Alaska in the winter. Hopefully he went in the summer. And Nootka Sound, now Vancouver Island, Canada, by August 1788, where a bay was named Tiana's Bay in his honor. See, once again, we notice here that the K, Kaiana, everyone, there's a handful of people that are using a T, right? Tiana's Bay, that's kind of named after Kaiana, but there's a T being used. And, we did do that series on the evolution of the language, but I find it interesting. How do you go from a T to the K? And I think I heard or saw a comment by some of the chat that's going on that depending on which island you came from, you would say T or K. And also you notice in Ha'amoa, they do the same thing too, right? They say Konga or Tonga. So there's some interesting things going on over there. Oh, there we go. Mo is saying the ni hao or ni hao and Kauai. Use the T and the K's interchangeable. Okay. There he observed shipbuilding and met indigenous Alaskans and Native Americans longing for Hawaii's warmth. Returning via Maui on December 6th, 1788, and Kealakekua Bay, he was greeted by Kamehameha, to whom he gifted surviving items like weapons and gunpowder, though cattle, goats, and horses and plants perished en route. So it looks like he, the weapons is what survived in the gunpowder, but he was looking to bring some animals and plants as well to Hawaii. So very interesting. And Kamehameha was the one who greets him when he returns. Okay. Earlier in 1779, either Kaiana or his cousin boarded HMS Resolution under Captain Cook's successor. Oh, poor Captain Cook didn't make it very far. Hawaii was his final expedition. Briefly traveling from Kauai to Niihau, as noted by Surgeon David Samuel, these experiences detailed in Mayer's and Portlock's journals, plus George Dixon, 1789 account of Kaiana's paternal care for his daughter during 1786 visit made him a bridge between worlds. Very interesting. So he is very comfortable with the European ships and is very comfortable going from ship to ship, captain to captain, and feels pretty comfortable in making those transitions. Kaiana's influence on Hawaiian history was profound as a warrior. Let's get rid of that real quick so we can see diplomat. Okay. Warrior and diplomat and catalyst in the island's unification under Kamehameha amid European contact. Returning in 1788, he allied with Kamehameha, leveraging his foreign knowledge to secure firearms and ammunition from traders like Douglas, transforming warfare. Though historians like David Miller in the Hawaiian Journal of History clarify British sailors, not Kaiana alone, introduced muskets and cannons. As Kamehameha's commander, he fought in campaigns against Keoa Kuahu'ula on Hawaii Islands and invasions of Maui and Oahu by 1795, serving as an arms dealer to multiple chiefs and communicating with explorers like George Vancouver, who visited Hawaii thrice from 1792 through 1794. Vancouver's journals accused Kaiana of seizing the ship Fair American in 1790, killing most crew, and allege an affair with Kamehameha's wife, Ka'ahumanu, though disputed. Okay. Now things are getting a little interesting here. So Kaiana is kind of serving like a middleman, trafficking and selling arms and, communicating back and forth, probably facilitating trade and so forth. But also, he's being accused of sacking some ships and didn't seem to be as successful as Urukalala in sacking the ships and not leaving a lot of evidence behind, because that's where that accusation comes from. And then, apparently there's an accusation here of Kamehameha's wife, Ka'ahumanu, who is a main character in the series here. Some infidelity there. So, hey, wouldn't be the first time. Maybe there is history that Kaiana and Kamehameha have a falling out. Wouldn't be the first time if this were to be true. But also, it looks like Vancouver, who knows what his motives are and intention. If he was just saying that to cause issues, maybe he was frustrated with Kaiana, maybe didn't get a good deal or something. Who knows? But that's kind of interesting. That could be, even though it's disputed, allegedly, but that would be not an unusual reason to be disenchanted with Chief. Next, tensions peaked when Kaiana was excluded from a 1795 war council in Lahaina, so on Maui. So they've conquered Maui and a lot of this, and Kaiana has been a instrumental piece to Kamehameha in winning these battles and so forth, but then he's excluded from a war council. Yeah, that's kind of a bad sign, especially if you're thinking that the rumor or it's been discovered that you're hanging out too much with Kamehameha's wife. That would not be ideal. That'd be a reason not to be invited to the war council, because you're causing a personal war rather than a national war at that point. Fearing for his life, he and his brothers defected to Oahu's king, Kalanikupule, a cousin. Once again, these guys are all related. The betrayal led to his death early in the Battle of Nu'uanu, struck by a cannonball, spear, or club amid Kamehameha's 12,000-man assault, paving the way for the unification by 1810. Wonder how long it was from. So he leaves 1795. I mean, must be only a couple of years after that he's killed, because then only a few years after he's killed, Hawaii is unified by 1810. Native scholar Nateli Keahulani Bauer views it as self-preservation, not pure treachery. Kaiana's life, chronicled in Kamakau's works, Fornander's collections, and Joseph Poe's Hawaiian language accounts, highlights the era's shifting alliances and cultural clashes. So shifting alliances and moving on doesn't seem like a uncommon practice. Well, it just makes sense. They're all related. And especially if you're feeling you're not being appreciated or recognized as a big contributor to the success, or even as what's mentioned here is he's actually leaving because he's fearing for his life, which, kind of pushes the story of lack of loyalty or their sobriety with each other and their spouses. So this is going to give a lot of, I guess this is why they chose Kayana. The guy has a very colorful history, background, storyline. You can take this storyline and run 1,000 different ways. So this kind of makes sense. Typically you would have been tempted to think the first Chief of War, the main story that Jason Momoa would have taken would have been Kamehameha, because that's the big figure, the big figure in Hawaiian history. But Kaiana's history is a little bit more diverse, has a lot more swings and chaos in it, and also accusations. The guy goes all over the world. He's learning new things. He comes back, huge influencer in Kamehameha's initial victories. He is the broker of power, meaning guns and new technology. Eventually, there's a falling out, possibly because of, Kaiana and Kamehameha's favorite wife. A lot of interesting things here. So let's see. Let's go to the next one. Well, maybe that's it. I think that's all that Grok prepared for us. So eventually, I guess Kayana gets killed. So the Kayana story kind of ends there with him being killed on Oahu. Very, very intriguing figure, right? A lot of interesting experiences that he has. And let's see here. I did ask Grok, our research assistant, our digital producer here, to put some interesting facts together that we can just close out the show with here. It's an interesting question here from T-Style. He says, Xiaoxi Layu in your past interviews mentioned that there were several Tuitongas that married several Hawaiian princesses. Would that be before Kamehameha's time? I would probably lean towards much, much earlier than Kamehameha's time, T-Style, because the height of the Tuitonga typically is somewhere between 1300s and 1500s. That is when you would think that would be the highest probability, but it's got to be close to those times. But I would probably lean towards before, that's when that is probably happening, maybe 100 or 200 years before that. So maybe 5 to 6 generations before then, but could be later on as well, right? In the 1600s, very possible. But I would, if I were to guess, I'd put my money a couple hundred years before that. Additional says, with incest understanding of the Hawaiians in Tahiti. Yes, that was something that was a challenge. I think the most recognized tied to this, and the reason why she's remembered heavily in the Tongan oral history, was because of this challenge. Nua was her name, that she was a high-ranking daughter of a high-ranking chief from Hawaii, came to Tonga with her entourage, and obviously she marries the Tuitonga. And there was a common practice in Hawaii, I know from in Hawaii, possibly in Tahiti, because they're so close, that incest was a very, I wouldn't say very, it was a practice that was seen relatively often, or not common, but it would happen. And there is a situation in Tonga where that became a problem because Nua introduced that, and there is a sibling situation that happens, and then that's where the Tongan Wharewa and the chiefs institute the tapu to prohibit that practice moving on throughout the islands on Tonga. So, but yes, that was in oral history. That's a recognized challenge or practice that comes from Hawaii. Let's see here. We're going to come to, let's bring this guy. Add this guy to the stage. Add to the stage. Come on. Remove. Add. Okay. Let's share this one. So some just kind of like some interesting points. I asked Grok to just say, hey, find us some interesting things that you can find on Kayana. So, and we'll close out with some of these. I thought it'd be good. A lot of the viewers were saying, can we have a discussion on Chief of War? We're doing our best to provide some value to you guys. So it says Kayana's exact birthplace is uncertain, but likely in Hilo and Hawaii Island, where he may have been raised. Once again, that contradicts the other one that it was saying he was raised on Kauai. Seems to tie more to what you see on the Chief of War, tying into his deep connections with the island Ali'i lineages. He was probably a few years older than Kamehameha, born around 1755, positioning him as a slightly senior figure in the complex web of chiefly alliances during Hawaii's unification wars. So probability is he may have been a few years older than Kamehameha, and maybe that's why there's a falling out as well. He kind of sees himself put possibly as higher ranking than Kamehameha. In 1779, either Kaiana or his cousin briefly sailed aboard HMS Resolution, Captain Cook's ship, from Kauai to Niihau, and boldly requested to travel to England. But the ship's surgeon refused, citing concerns over his high rank and potential complications. So, pretty interesting, right? It kind of fits like it could be Kaiana or Kaiana's cousin who heard about Kaiana's journeys, wants to go overseas. So there's a high eagerness to travel overseas. During his groundbreaking 1787-1788 voyage abroad, a remote bay off the Alaskan coast was named Tiana's Bay. We already kind of covered that. In his honor by Captain William Douglas, now known as Icy Bay, marking one of the earliest Hawaiian influences on North American geography. So once again, showing some pretty cool influence and history of a Polynesian having parts of Alaska named after them. 'Here's an interesting little bit here from Mo. He says, I just came back from Oahu. So the last battle with Kamehameha in Oahu, for Oahu, they said he killed Kaiana in the battle. Some say he escaped and they got him later and Kamehameha killed him to take the mana and took his bone leg to make a necklace. I do know that was a common practice. More was, eating or taking a part of the body, the bones of an individual to take the mana, and obviously Kaiana being of such high royal blood, a recognized military leader, that would be something that you could see to get that mana if they really believed in that, or to just punish the guy for the accusations against his wife. But it says found in the Bishop Museum now. Wow. So they actually have an artifact that they think may be Kaiana's bones, is what I'm understanding from that, Mo. So thank you for sharing that. Nadia? Let's see. 1786, during a visit by British ships to Kauai, Kaiana was observed carrying his young daughter with remarkable paternal fondness, and when he grew tired, his attendants eagerly competed to take over, as noted by explorer George Dixon. So the cool thing is, sounds like Kaiana, I know there's mention over of a son, of a daughter here, so it looks like he had multiple children. So wonder if there's any descendants of Ka'aiana today. That would be kind of cool. We did see that one co-writer for Chief of War or creator with Jason Momoa. He mentioned he's a descendant of Kahekili. I wonder if there's any descendants of Ka'aiana today. Interesting. Let's see. We got a couple more. He surprised European captains like Nathaniel Portlock by sending unsolicited gifts of pigs and fresh vegetables to their ships during the first recorded Christmas on Kauai in 1786, contrasting with the often one-sided exchanges of the era. I think Ka'aiana must have had some heavy tongue and influence, right? Because that seems to surprise Nathaniel Portlock, because that wasn't a common practice, and that's also kind of also expressed by Captain Cook, because that was one of the things that Captain Cook recognized the most when he visited Tonga was the lack of theft, and then also the abundance and willing to share. Now, granted, some of it was to lure them into comfort so they could, sack the ship. But Ka'aiana over here is, buttering them up by 1786 so that by 87 he can go with them and travel maybe. I don't know. But he was very generous to the Europeans there. Here's that same accusation, that one guy, George Vancouver, who suggests that Ka'aiana had an affair with Ka'ahumanu. He's saying here that he describes them as the complete opposite as the other. So I'm going to lean towards the other people who said he was regal, he was kind, he was generous. This one guy, for whatever reason, seems to have a lot of negative reviews of Ka'aiana there. So despite being cousins through their grandmother, possibly Kuka Niawaula or Papai Kaniau, some 19th century accounts mistakenly refer to Ka'aiana as a brother of Chief Ka'eo, highlighting the tangled and often confused genealogies preserved in sources like Abram Fornander's works. That's one of the challenges of oral history. It can get confusing and intertwined. And so I'm not surprised that there are some issues there on the genealogical side. At the time of his death in 1795, during the Battle of Nu'uanu, Ka'aiana was arguably the most famous Hawaiian in the world due to his extensive travels and interactions with Europeans, a status that has since been overshadowed by Kamehameha's legacy. That is pretty cool, and that's obviously a reason why Jason Momoa would push Ka'aiana's character. One of the things I'm thinking here, because, one of the things when he traveled around the world, being such a large guy, I wonder what the average height of the Hawaiians were at that time. If Ka'aiana was unusually large, or if that was the standard back then. To be quite a specimen, 6'5", he's described as muscular and well built. So 6'5", he's probably at least 230 pounds. Maybe 260. Is he a Jonah Lomu size? Because they say Herculean, but when you're 5'5", Herculean maybe is not as big as Jonah Lomu. So the last one here, contrary to myths emphasizing warlike introductions, firsthand witnesses John Mears reported that Ka'aiana brought back more peaceful items from his travels, such as cattle, chickens, and mangoes, rather than focus solely on weapons. That's how we kind of talked about that earlier. He had some of those to present to Kamehameha, but they perished along the way. So pretty much all he had left were the guns and so forth. So, all right, guys. Well, looking at the time here, we just wanted to jump on real quick, do a live digital conversation. Our goal is always to have at least one every week. We did have a scheduled guest to join us tomorrow, but due to unexpected circumstances, that guest will not be available tomorrow. So we will try and reschedule for another day. So, with that being said, guys, appreciate you guys joining us once again. Like to thank Shogun for the kava bag being tossed in here. We greatly appreciate it. And once again, if you're new to the live digital kava session or to the Polynesian Eyes podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. Let me see here. Looks like we do have a question. If you have a specific question or want to throw in a kava bag, feel free to use the super chats, and we'll make sure to include your question or comment. It says T-Style says, if this was before Kamehameha uniting all the Hawaiian Islands, what would they have been called? If this was before Kamehameha uniting all the Hawaiian Islands, what would they have been called? I guess I don't fully understand the question there, T-Style. If this was before Kamehameha uniting all of the Hawaiian Islands, what do you mean? It's kind of interesting to me that I guess that's kind of the point we're trying to share here is before Kamehameha, there may never have been a unification of the islands, if that makes sense, that there was decentralized power for that. So let's see here. Yeah, for those who are watching, yeah, it's we are located here in my daughter's room. I had to kick out my second oldest daughter. We're gonna have to get the studio put up pretty soon because school's starting, and this room may not be as available as it used to be. Let me see here. Each island its own name. Yeah, that's what I was kind of leaning towards. Let's see if Tongan style gives some more. They became Hawaiians when Kamehameha united. That. Oh, I see. Yes, T-Style. That's when they became the Hawaiian Islands, right? When they became unified, they became the Hawaiians. I see where you're going with that. Because I agree 100%. If Kahekili won, they would have been Mauians, right? Or they would have been Maui, the kingdom of Maui, probably. So 100% that yeah, what they were before were just the individual islands from what we can see, and then they were just families intertwined. This is where we come back to Samoa as an independent, unified nation didn't exist until colonization. Fiji, Tahiti, Cook Islands, these were all just decentralized units of power with chiefs and tribes. That's why, maybe the term kingdom, I guess you could use that, but kingdom is kind of gives more of a unified feeling to it. But I guess you could describe, but more like chiefdoms, yeah, is kind of what I feel more comfortable in describing it as. But they weren't unified groups of islands or independent groups of islands. That's one of the things that makes it challenging now. Why people kind of view Polynesia as disjointed and like independent countries that really didn't exist. We take the position that there was a unifying government and structure. It was the Tuitonga as our perspective. Now, some people don't like that. That's fine. Some people think that that's overshooting the mark. Okay, maybe. But so far, I don't see or I'm not convinced that is overshooting the mark from our perspective. So really, really excited to see what Jason Momoa does with the series. We hope he has and obtains tremendous success because that's only going to lead to more stories coming out of Hawaii, more stories coming out of Polynesia, more stories coming out of everything that we need to express our culture and our history more. And really, my hope long term is further highlight why we were one nation, one people, under a unified government who shared a language, history, culture, religion, and obviously government. And here in the Polynesian Eyes podcast, we believe that, we promote that idea, we encourage conversations around that idea, and Jason Momoa and the Chief of War is a positive thing towards that. And we promote that and wish him the best of luck. And if Jason ever wants to jump on the podcast, we'll try and squeeze him in. It's a busy schedule. Yahweh. That's very wishful thinking, but hey, anything is possible. With that being said, Malo, once again, for the kava bag there. Appreciate the donation in Maukava. Appreciate that, Shogun. And to everyone listening in, be bold, stay curious, and don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Till next time, peace.